Hey guys, in this video I'm going to show you how to play Take the A Train and a few things about soloing over it and all sorts of kind of stuff, or it sounds like a little bit like this. And then you can get into solos. We're going to talk a little bit about that today. All right, there you go. All right, so let's get into it, hey? So now you can download the this sheet of music that I've put together for you guys at jazzpianolessons.online, so you can go there and grab it. It's all free and all that kind of stuff. All right, so let's get on with the tutorial, okay? So the first little bit is the intro that Duke Ellington himself played. You know, so it's worth kind of knowing it, right? So now I have put the right hand down the octave. I've written it down the octave just so it's easier to read. So it's literally, it should be up here, all right? But I've written it down here for you guys, all right? So it doesn't really matter too much where you play it, but that's kind of the idea, all right? So hopefully that makes sense for you. All right, so you've got like a C chord inversion here, okay? Just a kind of standard triad C version, C inversion, and then you add a G flat, okay? That's all you have to do there. And then here you've just got, you're starting on your pinky on the E, and you just go down those 5 notes, 2, 3, 4, 1. And it's the same thing again, but with the higher A flat at the end. And then it repeats that twice. So that's the intro. That's something you should learn without improvising it, really, you know, without kind of coming up with your own thing. I guess you could learn that, and then you might want to do some different tweaking on that. But it's at least, it's worth knowing it as a jazz standard, kind of standard intro to the jazz standard, if that makes sense. All right, let's move on to where, you know, it's just really just the lead sheet that we're looking at here. So some of the lead sheets will say it's a C6 here. Whenever I see C6, I kind of just see major 7 in my mind. So I've written a C major 7 here. Now, one of the things that I did, I think I did it on the second time through, and you might want to do this. I played a C major 7 here in a axis of a third voicing. You can check out my videos on axis of a third and axis of a 7th voicings if you're interested. But here, basically, we're going to use that 4 times, and I'm added in a couple of extra chords that second time round. So I did C major 7, D minor 7. Now, if you keep the A and the C in the same place, and then you bring up the outside notes, you're going to get an E flat diminished 7 chord, and then finish off with an E minor 7, all in the same voicing, right? So 1, 2, all right, which is kind of what was going on with the saxophones in that section, I think. I can't remember anyway, but anyway, so you got like the melody. All right, so that's what's going on there, right? So from the C major 7 to that D7 sharp 11, but you can add in that if you want to. Just something you can have a crack at. All right, so in terms of other options you might want to go with, here I literally just used an inversion of the 4 notes of C major 7. There's the 4 notes of C major 7, C, E, G, B. So nothing fancy. I've just kind of started on the C, the G. What am I talking about? Sometimes I might use the 9 instead, so you get that kind of a sound instead. Now here, it's a D7, or sometimes people say it's a D9 sharp 11. The reason is because the E is the 9 and the G sharp is the sharp 11, all right? So we kind of really need to talk about that sharp 11, but outside of that, it's not a big deal, all right? So I often play a sharp 5 here as well as the sharp 11. I usually don't worry too much about the sharp 11 if I'm playing the melody. When I'm improvising, it's a different story, but when I'm playing the melody is the sharp 11 anyway. So as long as you play, you know, the rest of the chord, there's a D9, right? Kind of think of it as face with an F sharp, all right, with that G sharp. That gives you already your D7 sharp 9. So that's one way you could play it. You could, you know, add it in there if you wanted to. There's the G sharp, all right, the sharp 11, okay? You could do sharp 9 as well, yeah, sharp 9 there. That's got a nice kind of sound to it, a bit funky. And the sharp 5 is what I've added in there. So you go, that's kind of got a cool kind of a sound, all right? Now when you're soloing over that, or even if you're kind of filling in the blanks here, there's a couple of great scales that you might want to think about using. Now the D7 sharp 11 lends itself really well to a couple of scales. Now, if you're doing the sharp 11 and you're not really alterating anything else, then a great way of playing it is the D, either the whole tone scale or the diminished blues scale. So the whole tone scale will give you that kind of a sound, right? Interesting kind of sound, especially if you've just come from playing C major in the first bar, right? You're playing C major, the scale, or you might be playing C Lydian. So there's C major, the scale. That works beautifully with the C major scale, but also C Lydian does too, right? So it's got that F sharp in there, and that's pretty kind of cool in that the next chord is a D7 chord, so it kind of has that F sharp in there already. So it's almost like leading into that. You can do that if you wanted to, right? So. Right, so that kind of lends nicely into it because we kind of pre-warned the listener that the F sharp's about to happen. Now, if you don't want to pre-warn the listener, then don't do it. You know, just just do a normal F, right? Okay, but we've got that D7. So here is the diminished blues scale, or sometimes known as a half whole scale, because you got one semitone or a half note and then a full tone, right? So it's got that kind of a sound. Oops, I played the wrong note there. All right, so that is the D diminished blues scale, which works nicely. All right, particularly with sharp 9 or sharp or flat 9. So that works really nicely. Okay, so that's the diminished blues of the D, or you can go with just that whole tone scale. They're nice. They're two nice ways to get through that. All right, let's look at the rest of the song. All right, so we've got D minor 7. All right, I'm playing like an A voicing there, starting on the 3rd. I'm using that 9, and then all I'm going to do to change from the D minor 7 to the G7 is I'm just going to move this C to a B. All right, and then I end up with a G13. So really easy to play. All right, really easy to play, C major 7. All right, now the D minor here, and I'm playing an altered G7 there just because I can. I'm doing a sharp 9 at the moment, and then a flat 9 if you wanted to do that. All right, the next one's the same. And this is the same as well, except for the turnaround. So instead of doing a D minor to a G, we've got G minor to a C. All right, so you could do something like that. You could kind of walk. as you head into the C, the F major 7 section there. You could use a tritone substitute if you wanted to there. You could do G minor going to an F sharp 7 chord. That would kind of work really well. You could do the C, then the F sharp. You can do that as well. All right, that kind of sounds kind of cool. We're going into F major 7. I'm just literally playing almost a root position there, but just with a G there. I think this bit works nicely with kind of some little stabs through there. Just kind of picking whenever you want to do it there. Be creative with how you do it. You can kind of pretend you've got your bass player playing with you. Now there's a lot of space in here. Now Duke Ellington was a master of using space, and so was Count Basie, even more so probably a master of using space, right? Of underplaying and it sounding great. Okay, so worth having a listening to those two guys playing the piano, right? Great arrangers, obviously, great bands that they had, big bands, but also very interesting piano playing. Not super technical most of the time, though Duke Ellington sometimes played pretty quick, but they were definitely masters of thinking about the entire band, being a team player essentially. All right, so you could kind of do kind of a sparing thing. Just keep that rhythm in your mind. Just a couple of little stabs here every now and then. That'll keep it going, right? That's one way you could do it. You could kind of walk the bass. You can kind of do that kind of thing, or you can kind of maybe do a little bit of both, a little bit of filling in the gaps if you wanted to, or a little bit of, some walking the bass, a couple of stabs of the chords. You can kind of go, you can kind of do that as well, right? Do the melody first, then walk. You could do that as well if you wanted to. All right, and then we head to the D7. D minor there. Just doing that same thing again, going from that C, changing that to a B, which gives us our G13. And then I'm just going to add in that flat 9 there, okay? Which is the melody as well, right? You might want to add in the sharp 5 there as well. You could do something like that. You could kind of do as a tritone substitute again as well, and do a D flat chord. If you don't know what tritone substitutes are, I've got a couple of videos on that. So just type in my name, tritone substitutes, or just type it in anyway. You'll find someone talking about tritone substitutes. But they're great ways of doing probably your first lot of reharmonization. I would go with tritone substitute. If you've never reharmonized before, start with tritone substitutes. And then kind of go from there. All right, so then it kind of does the same thing, all right? So there's no surprises there, and we've already talked about that. There are a couple of things you could add in there. In the original, there's like at the end, there's like there's something that I can't remember what it is, all right? So it's kind of fun where you're just kind of walking up there. You might want to think of that. You can kind of think about quoting. Sometimes I quote within Take the A Train. I have done a couple of times, and I try not to do it too much anymore because it's only funny the first time, is like put The Simpsons in or something like that, right? So you go in that section, right? Okay, so obviously I'm going to go through another time just so you can kind of hear what I'm talking about, all right? All right. I don't want to do that. I don't want to kind of just quote it fully straight on. I mean, you can if you wanted to, but I'd rather kind of hint at the quote a little bit there, So, I mean, that was more than just hinting. That was pretty obvious, I think. But that's something you can do, quote another song or something like that. You can add in that through the piece of music. You can be playing right here. you can do a whole bunch of different things there. All right, so hey, why don't we talk a little bit about soloing, some ideas. This, I guess, is we're talking a little bit more advanced stuff that you might want to be, maybe try one or two of these particular things. So let's go back to the beginning of the chart. Now, of course, when you're soloing, one of the most important things to do is to listen. So when you play a note, you want to kind of listen to that note and say, well, what does my ear want that to do next? Where does your ear say that G should go to next, all right? Is it a jump? Is it a step? Is it going down by step or whatever? And you kind of think about that, try and hear it. What is, you can even maybe sing under your breath as to what you want to do, All right, so I'm kind of just singing in my mind what it is that I want to play. I don't always get it right, but I've got a bit of an idea of what's going on. At least it helps me with the phrasing at the very, very least, right? You don't want to just keep playing over and over again. It's like somebody who never shuts up when they're talking, right? You want them to stop talking just so you can kind of digest what they're saying. Now, it's the same thing when we're playing piano. We need to stop and allow people to hear what it is that we've already said before we go and say something else, right, from a musical point of view. Okay, so that's something you can think about. Now, as you're listening very carefully, think about, what are the notes of the scale that's appropriate here as well. Now, basically, when I think that all 12 notes are possible at pretty much any one time, okay? But if I'm playing a C major 7 and I'm hearing in my mind, right? Hearing in my mind B flat, my music theory knowledge tells me that's probably not a good idea, Glenn. Okay, it's probably not a good idea, right? Okay, right. But if I'm hearing it and I know 100% sure that's the note I want, then you just go for it anyway, right? But if I think I'm hearing the third, right, of the scale, in C major, that's the E, right? If I think that I'm hearing an E, I'm a little bit more, I don't have to be quite so cautious about having a crack at it. It's like, I think it's an E. If I get it wrong, as in like that's not the note that I was hearing, right, it's not going to be a disaster, right? This train's still going to be able to get to the next station. Sorry about the pun there, all right? But you know what I'm trying to say here? Like if I think it's an E, it's probably going to sound okay. That's not the note I wanted, right? Maybe that's the case for you, right? But it still will sound fine, so you'll be able to get away with that, okay? So you do need to learn your scales well. So think about what scales are appropriate. Now, it's in the key of C, so most of the time in this piece of music, the notes of C major are going to work fairly well. It does change key a few times. All right, so C major 7, the C scale kind of works beautifully through it. So you can kind of practice the arpeggio. You could kind of practice it like that. You just want to get used to that scale, right? Now, it's not too hard when it's white notes because it's C majors. You can just like play random white notes and it's probably going to be okay, right? It does get a lot harder too, obviously, when we're talking about different scales, E flat major, or, you really need to make sure you know that scale really well. And you want to be able to kind of do it like the same thing we did with the C major scale. You want to be able to do that with the white and the black notes going on, all right? So obviously the right white black notes, that are happening at the right time, okay? So think about each scale. So let's go through each one of the ideas. So I think C major 7 is great with the C major scale with this one because we're in the key of C. But C Lydian works really nicely as well, which we talked about before, all right? So that's got the F sharp. That works really nicely as well. The D7, sharp 11, maybe if you add sharp 9, sharp 5, flat 9. Anyway, you can think of either that diminished blues scale. Here it is again. Now, there are only 3 diminished blues scales, all right? So that's a really useful tip for you to know, right? So when I first learnt them, I learnt the C one first, the F one, and the G one. So the C diminished blues. Right, what I mean by there's only 3, it's like there's only one chromatic scale, right? And if you start on a different note, you've got a different chromatic scale, but it's essentially, it's just the same one, right? There's the C one. That's the fingering that I use. If I'm doing 2 octaves, I'll put my thumb there on that second C, all right? So that's the fingering I use for the C one, all right? And then I learnt the F diminished blues and the G diminished blues. All right, that's the fingering I used for the F diminished blues. Now this is actually the same one we're using for the D, right? So that's what I used here. All right, so it's that. So you could use that same fingering, or you could use different fingering, depending on how you want to think of it, right? But if you learn the F one, the C one, and the G one, you will actually know all 12, right? And then you've just got to start at the right spot, okay? So hopefully that makes sense. I know it's a little bit of a crude way to kind of think about it, but it's a great way for you to learn them quickly. There's only 3 of them. Now, there's only one chromatic scale, so if you don't know the chromatic scale, learn the fingering for that. Because once you learn that fingering, you are set for life whenever you want to play fairly chromatic. And it's also a way of teaching your fingers to kind of pivot on your thumb, all right? That's what chromatic scales do for you as well. So that's a really useful tip for you, all right? Now, the whole tone scale, there's only 2 of them, all right? There's only 2 whole tone scales. All right, so, all right, so that one I start on the C. So the whole tone scale starting on D is going to be the same thing, right? All right, so that was what I was using for the D7 sharp 11 sometimes. That's a really useful thing to do. So go up 1 semitone or go down 1 semitone and practice the other whole tone scale, and you've got another 6. What am I doing? I'm holding up way too many hands, aren't I? Well, not way too many. 1. There we go. 6. All right, another 6. You've got 2 lots of 6 and you've got your 12, and therefore you will have, you will know every single whole tone scale. All right, the next one, D minor 7, G7, C major 7 is a 2-5-1 in the key of C. So it's worth kind of pulling out some of those 2-5-1 licks that you've learned. If you haven't learned some, go find some. I've done a couple of them on this channel, and you could use some of those to help you out with that, right? But it's basically the key of C major, right? So you can use white notes for that whole time, but some of the notes are more important than others, right? So this is a really D Dorian, G Mixolydian, then of course C majors. Now you might notice that in the melody, and I'll just kind of point out here, you see there's a lot of accidentals going on here. We've got sharps, flats, and different stuff going on. So there's a little bit of chromaticism in the melody, all right? So to play a little bit chromatic whilst you're doing this, it's kind of cool, So that kind of works, right? So you can be you don't have to stick to, you don't have to stick to just those white notes, particularly with the G7 chord, because dominant chords, you have a lot more options to kind of go for it. But you can get away with it very easily on the minor as well. One thing I would suggest is when you're starting to play a little bit more chromatic, now obviously use your ears, and use any music theory that you've got to kind of know what notes might sound good and what notes don't sound good. But probably the most important thing to know is know your guide tones really, really well. So if you get into trouble at all, you just head back to one of those guide tones, right? It's like safety bar. It's like you're playing tip and, the guy who's chasing you gets real close, so you got to jump to that bar and touch the bar. I'm safe, you know. You can't tip me, right? That's kind of the idea, basically, you know. So here's D minor 7. All right, nothing surprising there. Okay, I mean, not very exciting. I'm just kind of playing random notes, right? Here's the G, right? There's one of the guide tones. I'm going to go crazy. Now, if I want to resolve nicely for the C major 7, the guide tones are C, E, G, B, but more importantly, the E and the G, the 3 and the 7, okay? So I could see how that resolves everything. You know, there's lots of tension, but it's resolved. Now, if I go too far, I'll just come back to one of those guide tones. If I haven't gone far enough yet, then I'll just keep going, play a little bit more outside. That's okay, right? You can be as creative as you want, you know, especially if you kind of... So let's go the D minor. G. If you've got a pattern going on, you can kind of keep going for a little bit longer, all right? But as soon as you get into trouble, you've got to start heading back to one of those guide tones, and it lets the listener know that you know what's going on. All right, hopefully that helps you. All right, guys, all the best. I will see you again real soon for another tutorial. Hey, if you've got any particular things you would like me to cover, then yeah, just hit me up with that, and we'll see what we can do. All right, bye.